Everybody, thank you for coming again. Wonderful to be here teaching with you this morning. There is a handout. Don't worry, we'll give it out shortly. The truth is, it would probably make more sense to do the shir with a chumash, but I have a chumash. We'll make do with the handout. The topic for this morning is, I'd say one of the catchier topics I've managed to come up with is from revelation to legislation, and that is what do I mean by that topic? What are we talking about? So I think when you think about the Parashat HaShavua, the parashas that we're reading this week, every year we move from Yitro to Mishpatim, and there's a letdown. There's an anticlimax, right? We get to Parashat Yitro, we're building up all the time, up to Ma'amad Har Sinai, divine revelation, 10 Commandments, Aseret HaDibrot, Anochi Hashem, right? It doesn't get more inspiring than that. That is the moment. That is the seminal moment of Jewish history. The Ramban writes, we'll see later on, but the Ramban has an amazing language. He says that moment of Har Sinai, it is not a moment we have an obligation to remember. It is a moment we have an obligation not to forget. He says that our eyes and our hearts should be there all the time. We'll talk a bit later on exactly what that means. But that is it. It doesn't get any more uplifting, any more powerful than that. Okay, so what comes next? What would you expect to come next in the Torah after Ma'amad Har Sinai, after divine revelation? Something, I would think, equally as uplifting, equally as awe-inspiring at the very least. What I definitely would not expect to come next is this. Eved Ivri, 6 years, 7th year, slaves, civil damages, laws. It's very, very dry. It's very, very technical. This long list, over 50 mitzvot. Again, the basis of Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, Bava Bashra, it's all important. It's all Torah Chaim. But again, slavery, monetary laws, oaths, torts, civil damages. How can this even be in the same breath as Ma'amad Har Sinai, as divine revelation? It really, really seems like a letdown. The truth is today, if you add to the words, yeah, you can add that. There's 2 pages, so. When you talk about the words mishpatim, so now in the state of Israel in the past 2.5 years, it's a very, very exciting topic. It gets people out into the streets with placards and all sorts of things. But until 2.5 years ago, you speak about laws, you speak about judges, you speak about courts. Again, it's not that interesting to most people. So the question is, number one, why is this the follow-up to Matan Torah? Why is this Parashat Mishpatim? Why is this the continuation of the revelation, right? Why should this come now? Of all the topics in the world and all the things, why do we have this? And I want to suggest to you that actually if we don't understand why Mishpatim appears now, then we've really missed the entire point of revelation. We haven't understood Ma'amad Har Sinai at all. But we'll get to that. But that is question number one. What is the connection? Again, really, what has Mishpatim got to do with Yitro? What has it got to do with Ma'amad Har Sinai? And in order to understand that, in order to explore that, I want to try and look together at the chronology, at the sequence of events that takes place at Ma'amad Har Sinai, that takes place afterwards. The truth is, it's very, very confusing. And I'm not getting into right now in terms of when did we receive the Torah. Was it on Vav Sivan? Was it on Zayin Sivan? Was it there's discussion in the Gemara about that. That's not the topic. But just in terms of the sequence of events, if we picture it in our minds, and we ask ourselves, what happened at Har Sinai? What took place? What did the people have to do? What were they told? What did Moshe tell them? When did he tell them? When did he go up? What happened? We'll see when we start thinking about it and we start asking the questions, it's not actually very clear. It's very, very, very confusing. And the reason why it's so confusing is because until this point, the Torah has primarily been a case of telling us narrative. And now it switches. This is probably the first time we have a very, very expanded set of laws, set of legal definitions, all of Parashat Mishpatim. All of a sudden, we leave the narrative behind. We're going into the laws. We're going into the details. We've had until now a few mitzvot. We've had a few mitzvot details here and there. But by and large, it's been narrative. It's been a story. And from here onwards, certainly towards Vayikra and Bamidbar, we have large sections of the Torah which are no longer narrative, talking about laws, talking about legalities. And we always have the question, when was this said? What's going on? Where was it? Where does the narrative continue? Where does the narrative go behind? Etc. Right? Just say one other thing, a story in terms of this moving from the narrative, from the story, which is very, very exciting, onto the details, the technical details. So this week we have Mishpatim, which of course is dealing with the civil laws and damages, etc., and all those sorts of things. All the more so next week we move on to Truma and Tetzaveh, and we go on to all the details about the Mishkan and about the building. It's very, very dry. It gets very, very technical. I'm reminded of a story of the late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. So when he was chief rabbi of the UK, he had a chavruta at one point with the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister, Tony Blair, of course not Jewish, but they would learn together. I think he said once a week they would get together and they would learn. And Rabbi Sachs he says Tony Blair would read the Bible, as he called it. And every night he would read to himself. He'd read some chapters, and then he would come and they would have their chavruta together. He would tell him what he's reading, and they would discuss together. So one day, they're sitting in the office, and Tony Blair says to Rabbi Sachs, Rabbi Sachs says, okay, what were you reading, Prime Minister? And he says, Jonathan, I've gotten to the boring bit. And he says, which one, Prime Minister? He says, I'm reading about Truma, about all these details, the technicalities. Again, the point is that to the unacquainted ear, to the unacquainted eye, we get through these psukim, they can seem very, very boring, and they can seem very, very technical. So what are they doing here, and what's it all about? Let's try and explore. So I think you all have the handouts by now. So if you have a look on the first handout, there are two pages. One is a double-sided page, and one is and that's followed by the single page. So what? Okay, hopefully you'll get it by the time we get there. We've still got a while. That's going to be at the end of this year. So in any way, let's look at the double-sided page. Source number 1, Parashat Mishpatim. The first thing to point out, because you might say to me, okay, Yitro was last week, this is Mishpatim, this is a different parasha. There's not necessarily a connection between the two. This just one comes after the other. It's got nothing to do with it. So the first point, and again, the thesis of this year is going to be, no, these are deeply, deeply, inherently connected. And we said here in source number 1, the very first pasuk of our parasha says, Ve'ele ha-mishpatim asher tasim lifneihem. Right, these are the laws that you will place before them. I just mistranslated. And these are the laws that you will place before them. Ve'ele ha-mishpatim. Have a look at Rashi. Rashi tells us, Ve'ele ha-mishpatim. He says, Kol makom shenemar eile pasalet al-rishonim, ve'ele mosif al-rishonim. We know that every single letter in Chumash is significant. Every single letter is important. So it could have said, Eile. When it says Eile, these, that is starting a new topic. That's got nothing to do with what came before. Where it says Ve'eile, Mosif ala rishonim, that is adding on to the previous ones. Ma rishonim mi Sinai, af eilu mi Sinai. Just as those which came before, which were from Sinai, the Aseret HaDibrot, Ma'amad Har Sinai, that clearly took place at Har Sinai. So too, all of these details in Mishpatim are related to Sinai as well. Okay, and then he says, Lama nismacha parashat dinin parashat mizbeach. Then Rashi gets a little bit more specific. He says, okay, why are we dealing with these laws of judges, etc.? The final pasuk that we saw in last week, the final section that we saw in last week's parasha, we'll get to it, spoke about the mizbeach. So he says, Lomar lecha shetasim sanhedrin etzel hamikdash. Okay, the place on the mizbeach, the mikdash, we have the Lishkat HaGazit. That is where the Sanhedrin, that is the Supreme Court, essentially. That's where they sit, and that is the connection. Okay, taking this a little bit further, source number 2 is Rav Tzvi Yehuda Cohen Cook. Rav Cook, the famous Rav Cook, his son was also Rav Cook, and that is Rav Tzvi Yehuda. He has books on Parashat Shavua. So he writes the following. Rav Tzvi Yehuda, by the way, is a very interesting thesis that all the parashiot of the Torah are given in pairs. Right? We have to look at the parashot in pairs. If you think from the beginning, right, Bereshit and Noach, that is the first pair that talks about the creation of the world, talks about humanity in general. From there we have, we're going to Lech Lecha and Vayera, which talks about Abraham. The next two are the parashot of Yitzchak, the next are the parashot of Yaakov, etc., etc. And you can go through the whole Chumash and you can see how all the parashot come together in pairs. So he suggests that Yitro and Mishpatim are a pair as well. What is the pair of Yitro and Mishpatim? That both of these are to do with revelation. Both of these are to do with Ma'amad Har Sinai, with the giving of the Torah. Says Rav Tzvi Yehuda, Yitro Mishpatim and Zug Parashot Shel Matan Torah. This is the pair of the giving of the Torah. Yitro hu aklal, kol Taryag mitzvot umuzot b'aseret hadibot shem hayesodot. Okay, there are sources. I didn't bring them for you here, but he says not only are they pairs, but the way that these pairs work is that the first one is the general, sort of the overview, and then we get more specific. We get into the details. So Yitro is the klal, that is general. We have all the mitzvot are hinted at in the Aseret HaDibrot. Okay, if you know how to, by the way, the Aseret HaDibrot, sure everybody knows, are not actually 10 commandments. They're far more, probably about 70. There are categories. But even within those, if you know where to look and you know how to extrapolate, you can get to all 613. We won't do it now, but it's an interesting exercise for another time. במשפטים יש התפרטות של שפע מצוות. Yeah, we have details. We have over 50 mitzvot which are listed explicitly. כלליות ופרטיות. שתי הפרשיות הן עניין אחד שלם. So these two parshiyot are one sequence. אותו ביטוי אלוהי מופיע בתחילת הפרשה שלנו, בסוף פרשת משפטים. Now further proof, how do I know that both Yitro and this sikha was given in Parashat Yitro? So when he writes here Parashat Shelanu, he's talking about last week's Parashat Yitro. But how do we know the textual proof that they go together? Because it says, כל הדברים אשר דיבר השם נעשה. כל אשר דיבר השם נעשה ונשמע. That expression, נעשה, that's Bnei Yisrael's answer, saying נעשה, we will do, that term appears both in Parashat Yitro and appears in Parashat Mishpatim. By the way, how many times does it say in the Torah, in these parashot, how many times do Bnei Yisrael say na'aseh? 3 times, right? We have in Yitro, we have na'aseh, we have later on, we have na'aseh again, and only later on we have na'aseh v'nishma. קבלת אור מלכות שמיים, הכל מסגרת אחד, המשך אחד, מראשית עד אחרית. Okay, so this is all one sequence. We go from Yitro to Mishpatim. Okay, it's all one sequence that is connected. But let's try and dive a little bit deeper. I want to say even more than that. Even more than one sequence of one comes after the other. Again, let's explore through the psukim, understand the chronology, understand the sequence of events, which we'll see in a moment is anything but clear, and that will help us understand what's really going on over here. So let's look, first of all, at the end of Parashat Yitro. Okay, so we all remember what happens in Parashat Yitro. We have Ma'amad Har Sinai, we have the Aseret HaDibrot. Immediately after Aseret HaDibrot, immediately after we're told of the 10 Dibrot, we have as follows: Perek Kaf. This is source number 3 that you have in front of you. This is the pasuk immediately after Lo Tachmod. וכל העם רואים את הקולות ואת הלפידים ואת כל השופר ואת הרשן והעם ויענו ויעמדו מרחוק. Right? Everybody saw. We saw the sounds. We heard the shofar. We saw the mountain on smoke, etc. Everybody moved back. ויאמרו אל משה דבר אתה עמנו ונשמעה ואל תדבר עמנו אלוקים פן נמות. Right? At that point, people said, okay, Revelation's very nice, but it's a bit more than we can handle. Right? So Moshe Rabbeinu, you go up, you hear the rest. ויאמר משה אל העם אל תיראו כי לבעבור נסות אתכם באלוקים בעבור תהיה יראתו פניכם לבלתי תחתיו. He says, don't worry, everything will be fine. ויעמוד העם מרחוק, משה ניגש אל הערפל אשר שם האלוקים. At that point, everybody stands back, everybody stands away. Moshe Rabbeinu goes up onto the mountain. Okay. Now, so that's the narrative. I would say at this point, up till there, we have narrative, we have story, and Bidyuk at this point, the Torah switches. We thought it switches at the beginning of Parashat Mishpatim. It's before we get to Mishpatim. These final 4 psukim of Parashat Yitro, or 5, right? So he says like this: Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Ko tomar el bnei Yisrael atem leitem ki min hashamayim dibarti imachem. Now, Hashem is, until this point, we've had revelation. At this point, Hashem is speaking directly to Moshe, and he says to Moshe, Ko tomar bnei Yisrael. You are going to go and tell bnei Yisrael. So we're expecting whatever Hashem is telling Moshe right now, later on at some point in the Chumash, we'll see that Moshe is telling Bnei Yisrael. Right? That's what it says, Ko tomar. So what does he say? And he gives him here 3 mitzvot. Lo ta'asun iti eloi kesef eloi zahav lo ta'asu lachem. Do not make gods of gold and silver. Right? Mizbeach adama ta'aseh li. When you make the mizbeach, וזבחת עליו את עולתך, את שלמך, את צונך, את בקרך, בכל מקום אשר אזכיר את שמי, אבוא אליך וברכתיך. ואם מזבח אבנים תעשה לי, לא תבנה את הן גזית, כי חברך הנפת עליה ותחל עליה. When you build the mizbeach, okay, you don't use metal. You don't bring, because metal is used for a sword. Metal is used to shorten one's life. We don't use that for the mizbeach, which is ultimately going to lengthen your life. And finally, לא תעלה במעלות המזבחי אשר לא תגלה עובדך עליו. There is a ramp going up to the mizbeach rather than steps, in order to keep it as a more modest way of approaching. Again, based on the way that they would dress in those days, etc. By the way, why these 3 mitzvot now? I mean, of all the things, we've just had a Aseret HaDivrot, we're going to have a list of 53 mitzvot in Parashat Mishpatim. Why these 3? So Tzvi Yehuda suggests as well, very interesting, the 3 cardinal sins. Right? We know of Yareg uval Yavor. There is idolatry, there is sexual immorality, and there is murder. So these 3, these are hinting, again, The idea that we're going from the general to the more specific, we're hinting at the three general principles on which the Torah is based. He says the first one, Lo tasuniti Elohei kesef ve'elei zahav, that is obvious, that is related to avodah zarah. The second one, in terms of how you make the mizbeach, don't have a sword, don't have metal going on the mizbeach, relates to shvichut damim, relates to murder, and the last one relates to modesty, relates to immorality as well. So those are those three mitzvot. But in any event, that is how Parashat Yitro ends. Okay, so again, just to place ourselves in the framework, where are we? We've had Har Sinai, right? What happened at Har Sinai? The people were warned. They had 3 days. They had to separate. They did the whole thing. They stood away from the mountain. Hashem came down on the mountain. Smoke, great big sound and light show. Aseret Hadibrot. All of that's finished. That's over. We've had Ma'amad Har Sinai has taken place. It's complete. Now we get told, seemingly, again, we're not so sure yet what the connection is, but Moshe Rabbeinu is told these are the 3 mitzvot. And then it continues, okay? What is the very next pasuk? The problem is we always have a week in between. So when we read the parashot, we read each parasha in isolation. We don't see them as one retzef, but as one sequence. But that is essentially that. We have these 3 mitzvot, and then it says, Ve'ele mishpatim, right? Ele mishpatim asher tasim lifneim. This list begins with these 3, continues with the next 53. And then at the end of that section of all those mitzvot, now the end of Parashat Mishpatim. So now we're in source number 4. At this point it says, Ve'el Moshe Amar, Aleh el Hashem ata v'Aaron v'Nadav v'Avihu v'shivim miziknei Yisrael v'shtachavitem me'al chok. Okay, let's skip the first 2 psukim for the moment. But then it says like this, Vayavo Moshe, Vayisaper la'am et kol divrei Hashem, ve'et kol ha'mishpatim. Now Moshe comes to the people, and he tells the people, what? Kol divrei Hashem, ve'et kol ha'mishpatim. Okay, so what is it at this point? So now the narrative is continuing. Again, we're after Har Sinai. We're after we've received all the mitzvot. And now Moshe Rabbeinu comes to tell the people, what? Kol divrei Hashem v'et kol ha'mishpatim. So remember when we started off, again, go back into source number 3, and I put it here in bold for you so it's easy to reference. This whole section started, Vayom Hashem HaMoshe, Ko tomar b'nei Yisrael. Hashem is talking to Moshe, and he says, go and tell the Jewish people. So now we have the list. The Torah tells us all the things that Hashem told Moshe, and we get to the end of that in Parashat Mishpatim, and it says, Vayavo Moshe, Vayisaper la'am et kol divrei Hashem. Moshe Rabbeinu comes and tells the people. Okay, what's he telling them? Presumably, Kol divrei Hashem is those 3 mitzvot we had at the end of Parashat Yitro, and et kol ha'mishpatim is Eile ha'mishpatim. Okay, that all makes sense. Vayan kol ha'am kol echad v'yomu kol ha'dvarim asher diber Hashem na'aseh. There you have it again. The people say, okay, that's good. We're in. Everything that you've said, everything Hashem has said, we will do. Over the page. Veichtov Moshe et kol divrei Hashem, v'ashkem b'boka, v'yivin mizbeach tachat ha'har. Okay, at this point they build the mizbeach underneath Har Sinai, and they bring korbanot, and they have all the blood. Right? Pasuk Vav, v'yikach Moshe chatzi adam, v'yasem bagonot, v'chatzi azam zach el mizbeach. They bring all these korbanot. They take the blood. Moshe Rabbeinu takes half the blood and he sprinkles it on the mizbeach. He takes half the blood and he sprinkles it on the people. This is the entering into the Brit. By the way, how did he know how to measure half and half? Strange question, but that's Rashi's question. Rashi says, you can see it underneath the psukim, Vayikach Moshe chatzi adam, he says, Mi chilko. How did you know that it was half? The implication here is that he had to have exactly half on the mizbeach and exactly half for the people, dealing with a lot of blood. Malach ba v'chilko. A malach came. There was a miracle. An angel came, a malach came to separate the blood in half. Okay, why is that what we need a malach to come down and do? We'll discuss later on. But then, Pasuk Zayin, Vayikach Sefer HaBrit, Vayikach Boznei Ha'am, V'yomu kol asher diber Hashem, Na'aseh v'nishma. Here we have it, Na'aseh v'nishma. Right? Now again, I was always used to thinking of, when did Na'aseh v'nishma take place? We always thought Na'aseh v'nishma was at Har Sinai. It was before Har Sinai. According to the Torah, according to the Pshat, again, the way we're learning right now, is that Na'aseh v'nishma was only after Har Sinai. Okay, interesting. Vayikach Moshe et adam, v'yizrok al ha'am, he sprinkles the blood. Okay, ve'al Moshe v'nadav v'avihu v'shivim miziknei Yisrael, etc. Okay, so just to convince you that I'm not making all of this up, this sequence. Again, this seems to be the sequence of the Pshat. Until this point, we don't have a reason to think that the Torah here is written out of order. Okay, and the one amongst the Mfarshim who is very, very adamant on this principle that the Torah is not written out of order, unless we absolutely have to say that it's written out of order, is the Ramban. The Ramban says, the Ramban's approach throughout the Chumash is that things are written in chronological order, unless it's impossible to say so. There are places where it's impossible to say so. For the example, the beginning of the Sefer Bamidbar, if you have a look over there and you open up, you'll see it tells us the dates and tells us when things happened, and it's clear that it was written out of order. The reason there that it's written out of order is because Bnei Israel did not bring the Korban Pesach, and the idea of Pesach Sheni should have been at the beginning of the Chumash, but it's brought later on. We don't want to draw attention to the fact. Okay, that's a share for another time. But says the Ramban, and again, he just spells out the sequence of events that we've seen, and there's no great chidush in what he's saying over here, because this is exactly seems to be the pshat of the psukim. Let's read it. Source number 5. Hinei הפרשיות כולן באות כהוגן, כי אחר מתן תורה, מיד בו ביום אמר השם אל משה, כה תאמר בני ישראל, אתם ראיתם כי מן השמיים דיברתי עמכם. Says the Ramban, immediately after Matan Torah, on the same day, but after Matan Torah, after Har Sinai, Hashem says to Moshe, go and tell Bnei Israel, right? That's what we saw. That was in Pasuk Yutet, right? V'yom Hashem Moshe, Ko Tomar Bnei Israel. That's the introduction to those 3 mitzvot at the end of Parashat Yitro. V'etchil lachzor la'asiyah avodah zara lo tasun iti. Right? Hashem tells Moshe not to worship avodah zara. Tziva oto v'ele hamishpatim asher tasim lifnehem. He continues that with the next parasha, ele hamishpatim. V'kol hamitzvot habaot achreichen, and all the mitzvot which follow that. V'yishlim b'azarat avodah zara shimtzu ba'aretz u'be'ovdea. Okay, we didn't read it inside now, but at the end, towards the end of Pasuk Parakaf Gimel, you'll see there's another warning about Avodah Zarah in Eretz Yisrael, etc. Then he says, you and Aaron come to me. Right, then the Torah says, Moshe Rabbeinu comes to the people, he tells them everything that Hashem had said. כאשר ציווה אותו, כה תאמר בני ישראל, ואת כל המשפטים, כאשר ציווהו, right, that's what we mentioned. It says he told them, כל דברי השם, וכל המשפטים are the משפטים, וקיבלו הכל בשמחה, ואמרו כל אשר דיבר השם נעשה, and Bnei Israel accepted that, בשמחה, with happiness, they said, whatever Hashem has said, we will do, והטעם, כל הדברים האלה אשר דיבר לך השם נעשה, כי מאמינים אנחנו בדבריך, we believe you, משה, כמו שסיפר במשנה תורה, ואתה תדבר עלינו את כל אשר ידבר השם אלוקינו אליך, ושמענו ועשינו. Right? Again, the background is, we remember at the beginning there was meant to be a revelation to the entire nation. There was at the beginning. That was too much to bear. The people said, we can't handle this. Moshe, you go. Whatever you tell us, we'll accept. Okay. Now the reason that all of that is a chidush in the Ramban. Now I did something a little bit sneaky over here, which is I brought you the Ramban from halfway through his commentary. Because he begins by quoting Rashi. And the reason why the Ramban has to give this whole explanation of how everything can be consequential and how everything is written in chronological order is because there are other Mefarshim who say things here are not written in chronological order. And that is Rashi. As I mentioned, this principle, and we have this machloket throughout the Chumash of Ein Mukdam u'Meuchar b'Torah. Torah is not written in a chronological order. It's written in a thematic order. Now again, everyone agrees that if there's no reason why it shouldn't be written in chronological order, so then it is in chronological order. But the question is, how far do we extend it? As I said, the Ramban, only when I have an absolute proof from the Psukim that it's not chronological, will I accept that it is not chronological. Rashi, on the other hand, is far more flexible with this rule, and he says, no, I don't need to. There are many reasons, there are many times why I can accept that it was not written in chronological order. I'll give you another example, and there are many in these parashiyot. Last week's parashah, the beginning of Yitro, Vayishma Yitro. Right? Yitro comes along. What was it? We have the parashah of Yitro, and then we have Ma'amad Har Sinai. So what was it that Yitro heard that made him come? There are those who say Kriyat Yam Suf, there are those who say Milchemet Amalek, there are those who say Matan Torah. If Yitro came before Matan Torah, clearly he didn't hear about Matan Torah. But if Yitro heard about Matan Torah and then came, that would mean that it's not written in order. Right? That's Ein Mukdam u'Meuchar b'Torah. So Rashi over here says, Ein Mukdam u'Meuchar, and we're going to have to look again at this whole sequence of events of Yitro and Mishpatim and realize that actually it's out of order. And when we understand that it's out of order, then our question becomes much stronger. Why do I have this list this narrative of 53 mitzvot, of all the most mundane and all the weakest links in society, so to speak, and all of these civil damages and all of these laws, all these technical laws written not after Har Sinai, but written during Har Sinai, written as part of the revelation. It's not something that follows on afterwards. It's something that was there and that was part and parcel. And then the question is why? But let's see how Rashi understands this. Again, you all realize the question when we were reading the Psukim, and we saw the Pasuk that said, Naseh v'nishma, which is written at the end of Har Sinai. According to Rashi, actually not necessarily. This all took place earlier. Let's see what Rashi says. Rashi says over here, okay, this is in Parak Kaf Daled, Pasuk Aleph. So if you go back to the first page, at the bottom, we saw the end of Parashat Mishpatim. The way we understood until now, based on the Ramban, was that all this took place after Har Sinai. But have a look at what Rashi says. Rashi says over here, source number 6, he says, Al Moshe Amar Ale, Parsha Zo Nemra, Kodem Aseret HaDibur. All of this took place first. U'ba'arba b'Sivan Ne'emar Lo Ale. This was said on the 4th of Sivan. This whole section of what took place in the camp, the dam and the korbanot and this whole thing, that was not in the aftermath of Har Sinai. That was part of the preparation for Har Sinai. Okay, very, very interesting. You'll see that the other section over here, this is much earlier. This is brought in the Chumash before the Aseret HaDibrot. Atem reitem asher asiti lemitzrayim, v'asai etchem al kanfei nesharim, v'avi etchem elai. ואתם שמוע תשמעו בקולי ושמעתם את בריתי והייתם לי סגולה מכל העמים כי לי כל הארץ ואתם תהיו לי ממלכת כהנים וגוי קדוש אלה הדברים אשר תדבר על בני ישראל. That is the intro. That is the prelude that Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu. He says to tell the people, you should know you are going to be an Am Segula. You're a special people. I've chosen you. This is going to be your mission. Right? And this is the introduction to Mamad Har Sinai. This all takes place when? This is written earlier, but this is on Bet B'Sivan. This is on the 2nd of Sivan. And how do we know that? It says, Vayavo Moshe, vayikal leziknei ha'am, vayasim lifneim et kol hadvarim ha'ela asher tzivahu Hashem. Moshe calls the people, and he tells them everything Hashem commanded. Vayanu kol ha'am yachdav, vayomru kol asher diber Hashem naaseh, vayashev Moshe divrei ha'am el Hashem. This is the first naaseh. Remember, we said there's 3. We've now seen all of them. There is 2 naasehs, and there is 1 naaseh v'nishma. So the first naaseh, which is written in Parashat Yitro before Mamad Har Sinai. That's over here. The people say Naseh. And then it says, Moshe came and he brought the people's words to Hashem. See what Rashi says over there. It says, Vayashev Moshe divrei ha'am b'yom ha'machorat. The next day. When is the next day? Shul Yom Shlishi. That is the 3rd of Sivan. Sherei b'ashkama ala. וכי צריך היה משה להשיב, אלא בא כתוב למד לך דרך ארץ, משה שלא אמר, הואיל ויודע מי ששלחני, איני צריך להשיב. As we find many times, the TORAH is teaching us derech eretz, teaching us the proper course of behavior. Moshe doesn't have to tell Hashem what the people said. Hashem knows. But that's the proper way. He sent me, and he goes and he gives the answer. But essentially, so what we have here, so the way that the TORAH is written, according to Rashi, is as follows. We begin Parashat Yitro. We have the story of what happens on Bet and Gim on the 2nd of Sivan. That's the first time that the people say Naaseh. Then the TORAH tells us about Mamad Har Sinai. Okay, which takes place a number of days later. We're talking about probably four days later. And then we have the whole section of Eilei HaMishpatim. And then at the end of Eilei HaMishpatim, this whole list of 53 mitzvot, the TORAH goes back to the narrative, not of what happens afterwards, but what actually took place before. So it tells us again, Naaseh, and it tells us Naaseh v'nishma, and we're talking about, we've gone back to Dalet B'Sivan, and this whole ceremony with the korbanot, with the mizbeach, etc. All of that was in the lead-up, that was before Har Sinai. Okay. According to the Ramban, it's all chronological order. All this took place afterwards. But according to Rashi, it took place before. So that leaves us now with the following question, right? If we started off, the question was, why is Mishpatim following on from Yitro? So that's still a fair question. Even according to the Ramban, what we would say, and what we saw in Rav Tzvi Yehuda right at the beginning was, we have one sequence of events. We have one long journey. We go from Yitro to Mishpatim. Why is Mishpatim the thing that follows immediately after Har Sinai? Okay, that's the question. But according to Rashi, the question is far stronger, meaning Mishpatim took place whenever it took place, but the continuation of the revelation of what happened at Har Sinai, that rest of the narrative which took place earlier, only appears at the end of Parashat Mishpatim. So if I was to ask you the question now, and everybody knows, right? In which parsha does Mamad Har Sinai take place? And everybody's answer is Yitro. That answer is incorrect. It's partially incorrect. The answer is in Yitro and in Mishpatim. Okay, so all of this, why does the Torah go out of its way to separate? Why do we take this dry, technical, boring bit, lump it in the middle together, and only then go back to the rest of the story of, Har Sinai, go back from legislation back to revelation, or whatever way you want to put it. So I think the answer is as follows. If you look on the next page again, now we're on to page 3. I hope everybody has it. This is the single page. I've brought you here a section from the Pachad Yitzchak. Pachad Yitzchak is Rabbi Yitzchak Hutner. And this is in one of his Sichot for Shavuot. He's talking about Matan Torah, but he talks about the following idea. He says, whenever the Torah talks about the luchot, right? We know we have 2 luchot. Harei tevat luchot ba'a k'shi chasera. Something very interesting. The word luchot, look at the way luchot is spelled here. Lamed, vav, chet, vav, taf. That's not the way that the Torah writes it. The Torah writes it chasera. That second vav, whenever you have the that sound, right, you can write the word. It can be malay or it can be chaser. So the word is written without the vav. It's written chaser. So how do we know that it says luchot, or it could be luchat? So we have an oral tradition in terms of how to read the Torah as well. We have the way that it's written, and we have the way that we know how to read it, how to pronounce it. But because there are no vowels, there is no punctuation, but the word is written in an ambiguous way. So the difference is, if it was written with the vav, there would certainly be the plural. But it's written without the vav, so it could be pronounced luchat. In theory, it could be singular. So is it 1 tablet or is it 2 tablets? Okay, we learn from this that the luchot were equal. Right? It's written that they're one, they have the same, even though Schwartz is here on Shabbat, Tzurah Shlishit, he mentioned the fact that the wording on the one side of the luchot versus on the other side is much more. There are many, many more words on the first tablet than there are on the second one, but nonetheless we look at them equally. שלוחות היו שווים, ועדיין אנו מגששים באפלה, מפני שאין אנו יודעים שוויון זה שלוחות, מה בא למדנו? Says Rav Hutner, very nice. So they're equal. So the 2 tablets are, so what? But what does that mean? What's behind it? He says this is in a very poetic language. Yeah? He says this equality of these 2 tablets, right? It's hidden deep down. Let's try and uncover it. So he says, Me'orah ma'amad Har Sinai, in the second paragraph now. Me'orah ma'amad Har Sinai, the event of Har Sinai, the divine revelation. Hu gama me'orah shel knisa babrit. Okay, this is not just where we received the Torah, but this was we entered the covenant, we entered the Brit at Sinai. That's why we have the whole story with the korbanot and the blood, etc. ומעשה כריתות הברית מעמד הר סיני מפורש בתורה ויקח משה חצי אדם וישם בעגונות וחצי אדם זרק על המזבח. That's the pasuk we saw. Moshe Rabbeinu takes the blood, half of it he throws on the people, half of it he throws on the mizbeach. Okay, that certainly took place. According to the Ramban, maybe it took place just after Har Sinai. According to Rashi, before Har Sinai. ואחר כך הוא אומר ויקח משה את הדם ויזרוק על העם ויאמר הנה דם הברית אשר קראת השם עמכם על כל הדברים האלה. כלומר, חצי לגבוה וחצי לאומה. Right? Half and half. חלוקה זו לחצאין היא הקובעת חותם הברית וכל זה נכללו במעמד הר סיני. In other words, says Rav Hutner, you have to understand that this was not just a coincidental event. This is the very beginning. This is the establishment of the Brit, establishing the covenant. This is the beginning of receiving the Torah, beginning of our mission as a people. Every single step here is deliberate, and every single step here is significant. And therefore, the fact that there is half the blood this way and half the blood that way, that is very, very meaningful. We have to know what are we meant to learn from it. Again, I'll take you back to Rashi. We go back onto page 2, where there's the pasuk where we said Naseh v'nishma. Right, just before that it said Vayikach Moshe Chatzi Adam V'yasem Ba'agonot Chatzi Adam V'zarak al HaMizbeach, and Rashi said Vayikach Moshe Chatzi Adam Michilko Malach Ba V'chilko. We need a Malach to come along and separate the blood. And the reason why that is so critical. I mean, what's the big deal? You know, there's a few more drops on the Mizbeach, there's a few more drops on the people. What's the big deal? Says Rav Hutner, Nechonin anu achshav. I skipped a few paragraphs here, but you can see what his conclusion is. לקבוע בנפש את האור הגדול הזה, כי המצוות של בין אדם למקום והמצוות של בן אדם לחברו אינם סתם חלקים או שני מקצועות בכלליותה של תורה. It says that the distinction between mitzvot ben adam lemakom, mitzvot between us and Hashem, and mitzvot ben adam lachavero, between man and man, einam stam chalakim or shnei mitzvot b'klaliota shel Torah. These are not just two separate categories or whatever. אלא שהעמדת המצווה של בן אדם לחברו משקל אחד עם המצוות של בן אדם למקום, הרי היא עבודה נשגבה לעצמה, עבודה של כריתות ברית לרגלי הר סיני. Unfortunately, we know there are people who think that, I'm from, and I just keep the mitzvot ben adam lemakom, ben adam lachavero, not so important. There are people who think, I have a kippah in my heart, I'm a good person, I keep the mitzvot ben adam lachavero, mitzvot ben adam lemakom, that's not so important. And whether you say it like this, or you don't say it like this, many people think it, consciously, subconsciously, whatever. Says Rav Hutner, you have to understand, we cannot pick and choose. We cannot decide. It's not correct to say that one of these categories is more important than the other, that one is more a part of Torah than anything else. Okay? And you might have thought, and what many religions in the world think is that there is my work, what they would call avodah ben adam lemakom, right? There are the spiritual things, there are the religious matters of life, and those are the things that I have to do according to my religion, and everything else, well, what do you want from me? What has religion got to do with my home? And what has religion got to do with my family? And what has religion got to do with... We can go through the whole list. Here the chalukah is between ben adam lemakom and ben adam lachavero. But we can expand the idea and we can say, in every realm of life, we can go through the mitzvot of Parashat Mishpatim one by one, and we can ask, what has God got to do with the courts? And what has God got to do with the banks? And what has God got to do with when I'm working? And what's God got to do with when I'm out at the shuk? And what's God got to do when I'm cooking? And when I'm doing this, when I'm doing that, right? He says, no, every single thing is part of, every single detail of legislation is part of revelation. And that's the chidush over here. And that's the chidush of the Torah, and it was a tremendous chidush when the Torah said it, because nobody else thought about it in those terms until then. And therefore he says, well, we're taking the blood, and we say, why it would be so, why it would be such a problem, why it would matter so much if there was a little bit more blood on the Mizbeach versus a little bit less blood on the people, then everybody would think, okay, because the Mizbeach is more important. And the other way, vice versa. And you can't think that. We have to know that everything has got exactly the same. Everything is part of this revelation. And that's why I said we have the two tablets, and one has got a certain category of mitzvot, and the other one has a different category of mitzvot. So there are two luchot, there are two separate things, but the Torah writes it without the vav. It writes it luchat. Meaning at the end of the day, ultimately, it is one tablet, it is one category, it is one set of avodat Hashem. The Pachad Yitzchak further says that, I didn't actually check which day it is, but he says that the Yortzeit of Rabbi Yisrael Salanta, the Talmidim of Rabbi Yisrael Salanta, who was the founder of the Musar movement, his Yortzeit always falls out in Parashat Mishpatim. All right, and they said that there is a message, there is a hint in there, because so many of these laws and so many of these technicalities are dealing with mitzvot ben adam lachavero, and these are malasot, but these are things that people tend to be somewhat negligent about. So that was what the Musar movement came to stress and came to emphasize. This is part of it. This is part of Ma'amad Har Sinai as much as anything else, and that's what the Torah is trying to teach us by the order of this. We see this, by the way, somewhere else. We see this in a very, 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 very interesting way. The Torah shows us in Parashat Emor. If you look in Parashat Emor, in Perek Kaf Gimel, what's known as Parashat HaMoadot, there the Torah in Sefer Vayikra, it goes through all the laws of the festivals, all the laws of the different chagim. Okay, and it's very, very clear the order and the structure and the sequence. It's not a narrative section; it's a legal section. But unlike what we've been doing this morning, we've been going through Yitro and Mishpatim, and it's very, very confusing. Where did this happen? Where did that happen? You go through even the mitzvot in Parashat Mishpatim itself. You go through the mitzvot. Why does one come after the other? And the Mefarshim discuss this at length. There are those like the Ibn Ezra who say it's just the order the Torah put it in. You don't have to learn anything from it. You don't have to ask the question why it's in that sequence. Other Mefarshim try and find Rashi, right? Try and find exactly what is behind the sequence, what's behind the order. But there are sections like Parashat Mishpatim where we look and either we struggle and we break our heads, or we look at the Mefarshim, or we try and understand what the sequence is. There are other sections of the Torah where it's very, very clear where the sequence is. You don't have to ask any questions. Vayikra, most of Sefer Vayikra is like that, by the way. And Parashat Emor, Parashat Moadot, is extremely like that. It goes through, it begins with Shabbat, and it goes through the Chagim, from Pesach through Sfirat HaOmer, through to Shavuot, through to Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, etc. Right? You can't get confused. If you have to go through, students in class sometimes have to go through and summarize the perek, right? Give a title for the perek. So that's very, very easy. You can't get lost, except for one pasuk. There is one pasuk there that's in the middle, and everybody asks, what is this pasuk doing here? It's completely out of place. It shouldn't be here. It's as if somebody did copy and paste in the wrong section. Have a look, source number 8. I didn't bring you the whole perek because it's very, very long. But before that, like I said, the Torah talks about Shabbat, and then it goes on to Pesach, and then it goes on to Sfirat HaOmer, and then it goes on to Shavuot. Okay? And it's talking about Shavuot, and it says, "Ukratem be'etzem hayom hazeh mikra kodesh yelachem, kol melechet avodah lo tasu, chukat olam b'chol moshvotechem l'dorotechem." Now, "Uv'kotzochem et ksir artzachem, lo tchale peat tzadecha, b'kotzorcha v'leket ksircha lo telaket, la'ani v'lager ta'azov otam, ani Hashem Elokechem." That's the pasuk. That pasuk is completely out of place. We'll come back to it, but just to prove to you how out of place it is, the Torah continues. "Vaydaber Hashem Moshe laemor, daber al bnei Yisrael laemor, b'chodesh hashvi'i." What's chodesh hashvi'i? That's Tishrei, right? "B'echad lachodesh yelachem Shabbaton zichron TORAH mikra kodesh, Rosh Hashanah, kol melechet avodah lo tasu, kraftem mishel Hashem." Good. "Vaydaber Hashem Moshe laemor." Next section. "Ach b'asor lachodesh hashvi'i hazeh, Yom Kippurim hu mikra kodesh." Then it goes on to Yom Kippur, and it could, if I had copied and pasted the whole perek, you would see it goes on to Sukkot and Shmini Atzeret, etc. So why, in this section, which is very, very clear and is very, very ordered and very, very structured, we have all of a sudden we're talking about Shavuot. We stop talking about Shavuot, and we have again pasuk kaf bet, "B'kutzochem et ktzir artzachem," when you are harvesting your field, "Lo tchale peat tzadecha, uv'kutzorcha," don't consume the corner of your field, pe'ah, that's a corner of the field that has to be left for the poor, "V'leket ktzircha lo telaket," right, "Le'ani v'lager ta'azov otam," what we call leket, shichcha, and pe'ah, different agricultural mitzvot, things that you leave behind, things that you forget, things that fall out of your hand. When you are harvesting your crops, you have to leave that behind. That is for the poor. Okay, that is a mitzvah that applies all year round. It's got nothing to do with the Chagim. So our question is, number one, what, and not only that, but the Torah talks about it in other places as well. So why does the Torah feel the need to go back to tell me about leket and peah over here in the middle of the Moadot? Why is it telling me that after Shavuot? As they say, ma kesher. What's it got to do with anything? So there is an opinion. There is an opinion that says that this is talking about the Ksirat HaOmer, which is a specific harvest offering that you have to go, and that is connected to the Moadot, and it's to come and tell you that even though you're doing that and it's for the Beit HaMikdash, nonetheless don't do it at the expense of the poor people. That is one of the interpretations. But there are many interpretations, and again, I always say, whenever you have a question where you have many different answers, that's a sign that it was a good question. Okay? So that is one answer. I think the Ramban goes in that direction. Rashi writes over here to teach you that anybody who gives to the poor, it's as if he's gone and he's built the Beit HaMikdash and he's brought korbanot. Okay, it's a nice drush, but again, the question is there, and there are other answers as well. But the one that relates to what we're talking about is the following. I saw this in a sefer of Yaakov Ariel, and others have suggested a similar idea, which is this. Yeah, it's always hard for us to imagine because we no longer live in a primarily agricultural society. But what is this mitzvah of peah and the mitzvah of leket? What is it saying? Essentially, it's saying that you, the farmer, you go out with blood, sweat, and tears, and your hard work and your toil, and you're out there in the field, and you're giving everything, and you've worked so hard, and finally you're able to come and gather your crops, and all you want to do is just take them inside and go and eat and go and sell or whatever it is. This is not when things are easy. This is not when you're in the place which is maybe the least religious place that we might expect. Right? You're out in the field, you're out working, but at that moment there, in the midst of that harvest, do you remember Har Sinai? Are you still there? Is that still in your mind? Is that still in your heart? Do you remember right now that it's not just about me? It's so easy to say, later on, when I'm finished and I'm finished my work and I go and I have a shower and I change into my Shabbos clothes and I'll come to Beit Knesset and then I'll have God in my life. Or right now when I'm at work, Okay, it doesn't matter. You can substitute, the agricultural. Right now, when I'm in whatever area, whatever it is, when I have a challenge, or when I have something, am I able to stop? Am I able to take a step back? Am I able to think, what does God want from me right now, right here, in this place? Do I understand that Ma'amad Har Sinai is not something that started and ended at a mountain, but it's something that is with me every single moment, in every single realm, in every single area of my life? That's the question. And therefore, yes, we've just spoken about Shavuot, which is interesting, and we can talk about when we give a shir for Shavuot, but the Torah never explicitly actually links the Chag of Shavuot to Ma'amad Har Sinai, to the giving of the Torah. That in itself is an enigma. But we understand that it's connected. But we talk about Shavuot, and then we say, V'kutzachem et ktse'otzachem. Understand that when you receive the Torah, when we stood at Ma'amad Har Sinai, in Yitro and Mishpatim, and whenever, it didn't end there. It continues, and it's in every realm, and it's in every sphere of your life. And yes, when you're out working in the field, that's the place that's the least religious activity that you might think. No, that's the most religious activity that exists. You have to remember that Ma'amad Har Sinai is a part of this as well. And are you going to not take the crops for yourself, but do what the Torah said, and despite all the hard work and the toil, be able to give up a tenth of your maaser, of your tzedakah, whatever it is. And that is why it's over there. And that, I think, just to conclude, maybe the Ramban doesn't say this. It may not be his intention, but I think that we can read it into his words, and I think that it's a true message. I said to you right at the beginning of the shir, we open up with the Ramban. The Ramban, in his Hasagot to Sefer HaMitzvot, the Rambam wrote the Sefer HaMitzvot. He counts all 613 mitzvot, and the Ramban writes his Hasagot. He includes the mitzvot that the Rambam forgot. Okay, well, the mitzvot, for whatever reason, the Rambam did not include as part of the Taryag, and the Ramban says these are part of the Taryag. One of those mitzvot is not to forget Ma'amad Har Sinai. Right? And this is what the Ramban says. It's a mitzvah shniya, shnimnanu shelo nishkach Ma'amad Har Sinai, v'lo nasir oto mida'atenu. The Ramban says, don't forget Har Sinai. Don't take it out of our minds. Again, not remember Har Sinai. Don't forget it. Aval yu'eineinu v'libeinu sham kol hayamim. Let our eyes and our hearts be there all the days. V'hu amro yitaleh. This is the pasuk in Pashat Vayitchanan. Hishamer lecha u'shmor nafshecha me'od pen tishkach et advarim asher u'einecha u'fen yisru mivavcha kol yemei chayecha. The Ramban did not make it up. The Torah says don't forget. There are other places. The Torah says remember. We're coming up to Pashat Zachor, right? Remember Zachor asher asa lecha Amalek. Remember. By Har Sinai, Torah does not say remember. It says don't forget. Hishamer lecha shmor nafshecha me'od pen tishkach. It's asher u'einecha, that which your eyes saw, u'fen yisru mivavcha. Don't remove it from your heart. Kol yemei chayecha, all the days of your life. V'oratam levanecha v'livnei vanecha. Teach your children, your children's children. Yom asher amata lifnei Hashem Elokecha b'Chorev. The day in which you stood before Hashem at Chorev, which is of course Har Sinai. So I was thinking, again, based on everything we've said, yu'eineinu v'libeinu sham kol hayamim. What the Ramban says is, don't ever forget all the days of your life. Let there not be a day when you don't think about Har Sinai. But maybe we can read in exactly the message that we've just said. Not just every day, but every part of your life, every sphere, every realm, every activity. Let your eyes and your hearts be there. Always Har Sinai. Yes, Har Sinai is with me when I'm at home, when I'm in the kitchen, when I'm cooking. Har Sinai is with me when I go to work. Har Sinai is with me when I go to the bank, when I go to the shuk, when I get into the taxi, wherever it is, when I get on the bus. Of course, Har Sinai is with me in the Beit Midrash, in the Beit Knesset, and on Shabbat, and all those places. But it's on all those places as well. And that, I believe, is why the Torah split up Parshat Yitro, Parshat Mishpatim, whether we accept the explanation of Ramban, that it's all one after the other, whether we accept the explanation of Rashi, that it is encapsulated one within the other. The point is exactly this. Always remember Har Sinai, always that revelation continues. Every detail of legislation that includes that, Sheyud Eineinu V'libeinu, our eyes and hearts should be there, Kol Hayamim.